Scott Tips är president för NHF, National Health Federation, en konsumentorganisation med huvudsäte i USA. Organisationens mål är att föra konsumentens talan inom grupper såsom Codex Alimentarius. Men vad är egentligen Codex Alimentarius? Vad beslutar de om och hur stor påverkan har deras beslut? Vi ställde dessa och en del andra frågor i samband med Scott Tips Sverigebesök i april i år. How would you describe Codex Alimentarius? What is it?
Well, Codex Alimentarius is an interesting attempt, a noble attempt, if you look at it in certain ways, to protect the consumer and to eliminate international barriers to food trade, both of which we basically agree with. It's just the means by which they do it. So this was an entity that deals strictly with food. In fact, the very name says that, Codex Alimentarius, which in Latin means food code. And they are establishing standards and guidelines that can be applied uniformly worldwide relating to food. And it doesn't matter whether it's mineral waters or shrimp farming or fisheries or supplements or food additives or even the labeling of food, you name it, there's a committee there. So you have the Codex Alimentarius Commission that was founded 50 years ago this year, 1963, and then you have various committees that operate under the auspices of the commission.
But I wonder how every person living in Europe, for example, how does their lives get affected by Codex? Yeah.
Well, it's not a direct effect because you're subject to, in Europe, to the European food legislation and food laws. So it's not a direct effect, but it is an effect. I'll just give you one example. So one deals with genetically modified foods, and already the European Union, to keep that out of Europe, they are having to pay a lot of money every year to keep that out. But these GM food rules and the like, not all of them came from Codex, but some did. Some of the labeling issues and the like are Codex related. So there are World Trade Organization issues that either have affected or will affect or could affect the European consumer. But mainly it's because, particularly in the field of supplements, some of the legislation, some of the rules and regulations in the Europe, actually a lot of them in the European Union, parallel what's done at Codex. So it only affects Europeans insofar as international trade. If there are imported foods or goods from other countries, then it would affect the EU more particularly. Now it could affect the internal rules if they're like the EU legislation or the rules and regulations are different than the Codex ones. In a way, it depends upon the way. Like, for example, if it's a harsher regulation, then there is a way that a Codex member state could force that to be changed and allow their foods in if it's not Codex compliant. So for quite some time now, the EU legislation has to keep an eye open for what's happening at Codex to be sure that they're in compliance with the Codex regs. So that does affect it a little bit indirectly. But there's nothing that forces the EU per se to adhere to Codex guidelines other than the WTO challenges that might be out there. But those are not often, those are rare.
So you can say that governments in Europe, for example, they are listening very much to Codex and what happens in those meetings. Could you say that?
You can say that, but yes, you can say that, but I would say they're more proactive, and the EU is taking, and I've seen it with my own eyes, a very proactive approach to shaping the legislation to match what's going on or what has gone on in the EU.
What kind of people are in the Codex? Who sits there on the meetings? Who are they?
Generally, they are country delegates, and those are the those are the ones with the most influence, and those are usually food regulatory agency bureaucrats who have those positions. And there are countries from Albania to Zimbabwe who literally that go there, but the ones that are the most outspoken are the EU, the United States, Canada, Australia, Brazil, Argentina, and increasingly China, actually. They become more proactive, China and Japan. They used to sit more in the back because they didn't quite understand English as well, which is the main, lingua franca there. And then also, in addition to the member countries, you have the INGOs, the International Non-Governmental Organizations. These are the organizations, usually trade organizations, they have an interest at Codex, and they will talk out or submit papers. And the National Health Federation is one of the, I would say, 5 consumer organizations that's accredited by Codex to go to the meetings, speak out on subjects, interact in real time with the other delegates, to submit written documents and the like. And we do all of that, and we do it pretty aggressively, and we're known for that, actually.
Who finances this Codex?
Well, it's mainly financed by the United Nations organizations, the World Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization. The FAO probably pays something close to 85% of the funds. The WHO is a little cheaper, and they pay about 15%. And then individual countries will give money every year to help, both with getting some of the developing countries to Codex, and just to help with the general operating funds. But I would say the main work comes out of FAO, and the main money comes out of FAO based in Rome.
What issues do you see as the very big issues coming up? What are they deciding about? What are they talking about? And what's your engagement in this? And what are you trying to?
Well, what are we trying to accomplish? I think the supplement issue is still big on the table. They haven't filled in the blanks on some of the upper maximum permitted levels. They are working on the nutrient reference values, which we had stopped the progress of back 4 years ago almost, but now it's restarted as of last December 2012. It restarted, and it's more of a threat where they're trying to dumb down the mineral and vitamin levels in what's considered a normal everyday diet. So that's an issue. We just recently, after having won year after year, we lost on ractopamine, where by one vote, if only one vote had changed, the US would have lost on forcing ractopamine down the throats of consumers, which is a vet drug that is very dangerous, and there are residual amounts left in the meat of pork that is then consumed by the consumer. So that's an issue. But what's replacing ractopamine now, and what's coming up through the 8-step Codex process towards adoption, is the vet drug called zilpaterol. And this was pointed out to me by one of the EU delegate heads, because the EU is very firmly, to its credit, is very firmly against ractopamine and zilpaterol, as are we at National Health Federation. So we've worked very closely together to stop its progress going through, because the US and Canada that use it extensively in their industry, they want to sell more of this product to the rest of the world, and they can't do it so long as it's blocked by various country legislation, such as the EU legislation.
To a person who wants to live a healthy, natural, good life, this sounds just crazy. Why do people want these these things in the food?
Well, in my mind, it's all about greed, and they think, maybe they don't think that it's actually healthy, because there are some studies that have been conducted that say, well, if you get this level of ractopamine in your diet, you won't be harmed. But they don't really know that because they've never tested that individual toxin with all the other toxins that we're subjected to. No one's ever done that test. And that's the key here, because they're looking at one item in isolation, and they do that with ractopamine. Then they turn their head slightly, and they look at melamine, and they say, oh, it's fine all by itself. Then they do that with aluminum, and you name it, the list is as long as my arm of all these toxins. And then at the same time, they're lowering down from optimal levels down to just bare subsistence levels, the nutrient, the good intake that we're getting. So you couple that all together and you have a calamity that's going to happen if it isn't already. And with the disease rate skyrocketing and illnesses and early deaths as well. So I think what it is they know what's going on, but they have their marching orders. And whether it's from industry or their bosses above, and I don't mean religious boss, I mean the one in the office ahead of them, they are going to push it through, and that's what they do. And quite honestly, the U.S. delegation does a very good job of pushing through its pro-industry agenda, which is really selling more and more of their products, and it doesn't matter if it hurts people.
When you read about this Codex Alimentarius on the internet and the fears of what they are going to accomplish, what people have, what they talk about is they are going to take away all the vitamins. It's going to be totally banned, and they are eventually, in the end, trying to stop us from growing our own seeds. What do you think about those fears?
Well, some of those are legitimate, some are not as legitimate. There's been none of the meetings that I've gone to, and I've gone to a very large number of Codex meetings. I haven't seen anything on the seed department that would affect it. Not directly, at least, maybe indirectly by hook and by crook, but definitely on the dumbing down of the supplements and the increase in toxins. And Codex, has that problem, but it's not monolithically evil. There's some really good people in there. People who believe as we do and who help us and are quite interested and concerned. I gave a speech in Moscow last week or a week before last on the subject of representing the consumer interest at Codex meetings and what Codex people would like. And actually the talk was extremely well received by over 200 delegates. And so I think what you find in some of these delegates is you find a sincere interest in wanting to do the right thing, but not necessarily having the right frame of beliefs to put it in. They come from a model that thinks that supplements are harmful. They come from a model that thinks that a way of thinking that drugs are great and will be very helpful in all instances. Well, in some instances they will, but not in all instances. And they see no harm in applying that same drug toxicological model to natural substances, which in my opinion is a huge mistake, because all it succeeds in doing, it's not saving people's lives or health at all by doing it, but it's increasing the price, the cost of goods, essentially, the price of those goods for the average consumer. And a lot of poor people and average income people will no longer be able to afford it. Only the rich will be able to afford it. And these poor people and middle income people, their health will suffer because of it. So it's really a shame. But I mean, getting back to your question, the goal of these people and why they're doing it, I don't think most of them really realize they're just sort of innocent fellow travelers, along with those who might have more sinister objectives, shall we say, to either reduce down the population, to certainly lower fertility, because that's one thing I've noticed throughout this entire thing, is that if you look at each and everything that's being done at Codex, increasing the toxin levels, and not just at Codex, but elsewhere, fluoridating the water supply, giving vaccines to people, again, dumbing down the nutrient quality of foods, putting maximum upper permitted levels on supplements and the like. The common denominator is reducing fertility. It's not killing people off, it's certainly not immediately, but it certainly is reducing fertility. And to me, that's the real crime that's going on, besides lowering the quality of health for people.
The fear might come from that people think that big companies like Monsanto, for example, get a lot of words said in these meetings. But what would you say?
And they do.
They do, yeah. Could you explain how do the big multinational companies affect these meetings?
Well, at Codex level, what they do, leaving aside just their lobbying efforts, they in the U.S. the drug companies at least, and this leaving out Monsanto, the drug companies pay about, on average, $6 million a day for lobbying efforts in the U.S. to lobby Congress and the agencies like the FDA and the FTC. But in terms of the effect at the Codex meetings, what they do is they establish these front groups that have these nice names, like the International Federation for Animal Welfare, another not so grandiose name, the International Food Additives Council. And Monsanto is behind IFAC, the Food Additives Council, and DuPont is, and some other companies, drug companies are behind the Animal Welfare INGO. And these are INGOs that I mentioned before that are simply there to express their views. They technically don't count for consensus, but in actuality they really do, because Codex likes to reach a decision by consensus. So those who speak up count towards consensus. Now the chairman and the chairwomen are supposed to just consider in consensus the countries and what they say. But actually in the noise of the event, who said what and all of that, how do you determine consensus? What's 51% versus 49% versus whatever it might be. And what I've observed is that everyone counts towards consensus who speaks up, whether they're for an object or against a proposal, they count towards consensus. And that's why NHF has been, and some of these other INGOs, by the way, have been effective, is because we always speak out. At many meetings I've been to, NHF has spoken out at the meeting more than all the other INGOs combined. But on some issues, the trade organizations are quite vocal. The International Dairy Federation, for example, is extremely vocal on certain issues. And actually, they're one of the honest trade organizations who's there, by the way. They've taken some really good positions on issues, and where it would hurt their interests, they're honest enough to say, hey, we don't want to weigh in on this, or, they'll tell the truth anyway.